The snow had been falling for 6 days straight. Not the soft postcard kind that city people drove up from Billings to photograph. This was Montana winter doing what Montana winter did, a grinding bone-deep assault that packed itself against every window and door like it was trying to get inside and finish the job. The cold had started on your spirit. Elias Thorne sat in the dark at the kitchen table and did not move. The bourbon glass in front of him was empty. Had been empty for 20 minutes. He hadn't reached for the bottle because reaching for things required a reason to keep going, and tonight he was running short on those. 53 years old. 190 pounds of what used to be the most precise killing instrument the United States Navy could assemble. Now he was a man who flinched at car backfires and couldn't sleep past 3 a.m. without seeing Kandahar burning behind his eyelids. The VA called it PTSD. Elias called it Tuesday. The farmhouse had belonged to his grandfather. 1,200 square feet of warped floorboards and drafty windows on 40 acres of nothing outside a town called Coldwater Creek, population 600, and dropping. He'd come here because the nearest neighbor was 2 miles east, and nobody knocked on your door asking how you were doing. Out here, nobody expected an answer. The only sound was wind hammering the eaves, and beneath it the slow, steady breathing from the corner. Havoc. The German shepherd lay on a folded army blanket beside the wood stove, his silver-flecked muzzle resting on crossed paws. 9 years old. 110 missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. A Belgian Malinois had blown an IED outside Fallujah in 2019, and a piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter had gone through Havoc's left rear leg, severing the tendon. The military vets had done what they could. The leg never came back right. Now Havoc moved with a rolling 3-legged gait that somehow still managed to look dignified, the way old soldiers carry themselves, like the limp was something they chose. They'd been assigned to each other at Camp Lejeune in 2014 and had spent 8 years doing things that would never appear in any report with a classification below top secret. When Elias retired, he'd fought 18 months of paperwork to adopt Havoc outright. If they were going to be broken, they'd be broken together. That was the deal. Elias finally reached for the bottle. That's when Havoc lifted his head, not the casual head raise of a dog hearing a sound. This was different. The scruff along Havoc's spine rose in a slow ridge like a wave rolling from shoulder to tail. His nostrils worked twice fast. His amber eyes went to the ceiling. Elias set the bottle down. "What is it, buddy?" Havoc stood. The bad leg took his weight without complaint. He moved to the base of the staircase leading to the attic and stared up into the darkness above. Then he growled, low, chest deep. The kind of sound that didn't come from nervousness, it came from certainty. Elias had trusted that growl in 3 countries. It had never been wrong. He pushed back from the table without a word and moved to the side cabinet. The Glock 19 lived in the top drawer wrapped in a chamois cloth. He hadn't touched it in 4 months. The action was stiff with disuse, a faint film of surface rust on the slide. He racked it anyway. Chambered around, Havoc had already moved to the attic door at the end of the upstairs hall. The door was nailed shut, had been since Elias moved in the wood swollen, and the hinges seized. He'd never seen a reason to open it. The attic held nothing but his grandfather's furniture, mouse nests, and 40 years of accumulated dark. Havoc scratched at the base of the door, scratched again, harder, his good claws raking furrows in the old paint. Then he turned and found the hem of Elias's flannel pants and pulled. "All right." Elias said it quietly like he was confirming a grid coordinate. "All right." He went back downstairs for the pry bar. It took 4 minutes to work the nails loose. The door groaned open on dead hinges and exhaled a breath of cold air so sharp it had a taste dust and something else underneath it, something that didn't belong. Elias clicked on the flashlight, held the Glock up alongside the beam, the way he'd done 10,000 times in places where the wrong door opened onto the last thing you'd ever see. He went up. The attic was long and low, the rafters close overhead, the floor a maze of sheeted furniture shapes and stacked boxes. His flashlight swept left to right, slow and methodical. No mice, no raccoon, no draft from a broken window. He swept the beam right. Beneath the far window, behind a fall of old canvas curtain, 2 boots stood on the floorboards. Military issue. Caked with mud that hadn't come from any Montana trail. Elias had processed the threat before his conscious mind caught up. Then the red dot appeared. It drifted out from behind the curtain and settled on the center of his chest, steady as a heartbeat. And every cell in Elias Thorne's body understood at once that the man holding that laser had done this before. Elias didn't freeze. That was the thing about 18 years of SEAL training. It didn't leave you when the paperwork did. The red dot on his chest was information, not a verdict. And information could be worked with. He dropped left behind a sheeted armoire the instant his brain finished processing the threat, and the suppressed round punched through the canvas curtain and buried itself in the rafter above where his head had been. The sound was a dry crack like someone snapping a broomstick. Professional. Subsonic ammunition. This man had done this before in places where noise was a liability. Not a burglar. Not a tweaker looking for copper wire. This was a hitter. Elias killed the flashlight, and the attic went black. He moved by memory now, counting floorboards, keeping his weight on the outer edges of his feet, the way they'd taught him in BUD/S to eliminate creak. The shooter would be adjusting, trying to triangulate by sound. Elias gave him nothing. He came around the left side of the armoire low and fast. They met in the dark with a collision that shook the rafters. The man was bigger than Elias had registered from the boots, 6'2", 230, and he moved with the compact economy of someone who'd trained in close quarters since before Elias's first deployment. A knee came up for Elias's midsection. Elias twisted, took it on the hip, grabbed the gun hand with both of his, and drove the wrist into the rafter edge once hard. The suppressed pistol skittered across the floorboards. Then it was elbows and forearms in the dark, and the attic was too small for anything elegant. Elias took a forearm across the jaw that sent white light across his vision. His back found the wall. The PTSD came for him then, not slowly, not as a whisper, but as a full ambush. His nervous system stopped reading Montana and started reading Mosul. The sound of wind against the roof became the sound of a firefight, and for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. He was somewhere else entirely. His body rigid, his hands shaking. The hitter felt the hesitation and used it. A fist found Elias's ribs. Then another. Elias slid down the wall, and the man drove a boot into his side, precise and practiced, and Elias went down onto one knee on the cold floorboards. The man reached for something at his belt. The knife came out with a sound like a whisper, and then the backpack hit the floor. It had been knocked loose in the struggle, the main zipper giving way, and a manila folder slid out across the dusty planks and stopped against Elias's knee. Even in the dark, the moonlight through the cracked attic window was enough. Coldwater Creek Veterans Incident Reports. Beneath that, a handwritten list. 7 names. 6 of them had red lines drawn through them. Elias recognized 4 of those names. He'd been to their funerals. Hunting accident. Vehicle rollover. Heart attack. Fall from a ladder. The folder was stamped with the county seal. Sheriff Clayton Briggs. The hitter's boot connected with Elias's chest and drove him flat onto his back. The knife hand came down, and Elias got his forearm up in time, took the blade across the outer edge rather than the throat, and then the man's knee was on his sternum, and the knife was rising again, and Elias had nothing left, his ribs screaming, the PTSD still detonating behind his eyes like a stun grenade that wouldn't stop. The man pressed the barrel of a recovered pistol against Elias's forehead, smiled. Elias could see the teeth in the dark. The trigger moved, and then something massive came through the attic darkness from the stairwell, not running, not barking, but silent and absolute, 110 pounds of German Shepherd, moving at full extension, with his good rear leg driving and the bad one tucked, and he hit the man at the throat and shoulder simultaneously and took him sideways off Elias with a crash that shook the entire floor. The pistol discharged into the ceiling. the attic filled with dust and the smell of burned propellant. Then the sound that cut through everything else. A single high cry, sharp and thin and wrong from Havoc. Then silence. Elias was already moving, already on his knees, his hand finding warm fur in the dark. Havoc! Havoc, talk to me! The dog's breathing came back to him shallow, rapid each exhale carrying a sound it shouldn't. The hitter lay still against the far wall. He would not be getting up. Elias didn't look at him. He pressed both hands against Havoc's side and felt the heat of blood on his fingers, and the knowledge settled into him like a stone dropping into deep water. The folder was still on the floor. 7 names. 6 red lines. His own name was the 7th. Elias had held dying men before, in Ramadi, in the Korangal, in a bombed-out schoolhouse outside Kirkuk, where the medevac was 22 minutes out, and 22 minutes was 19 minutes too long. He knew the specific weight of a body that was losing the argument with gravity. The way the muscles let go in stages. The way breathing changed from something automatic into something deliberate, like the body was having to remind itself each time. He knew all of it. It didn't prepare him for this. Havoc lay across his lap on the attic floor, the bad legs stretched out, the good ones still. His broad chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was wrong, too fast, too shallow, the breaths catching at the top like something was blocking the path. The bullet had gone in low on the left flank. Exit wound on the far side. Elias had stripped off his flannel shirt and pressed it hard against both openings, but he'd applied enough field dressings in enough bad places to know when pressure was buying time and when it was just ceremony. "Stay with me," he said. His voice came out flat. Military. The voice he used when he needed his hands to keep working while his chest was falling apart. "You hear me? You stay." Havoc turned his head and looked at him. That was the thing about Havoc that had never changed, not through 8 years of operations, not through the IED, not through the long gray months in this farmhouse when Elias had barely spoken above a whisper. The dog always looked at him with total, uncomplicated attention. No judgment, no agenda. Just, I am here. I see you. What do you need? Elias pressed his forehead against the top of Havoc's head and squeezed his eyes shut. And then it came. Not gradually. The PTSD didn't ease its way in, it detonated. Every wall he'd spent 4 years building through silence and isolation and cheap bourbon came down simultaneously, and suddenly he wasn't in an attic in Montana. He was in a courtyard in Kandahar, with Petty Officer Marcus Webb dying in his arms, Webb saying his daughter's name over and over like it was the only word he had left. He was on a rooftop in Fallujah with Danny Kowalski, who'd given Elias his last energy bar 3 hours before a sniper took him. He was in every place he'd ever held someone who didn't make it home. He was holding all of them at once. A sound came out of him that he hadn't made in years, raw and broken and too loud for a man who'd spent decades mastering silence. It tore out of his chest and filled the attic, and he didn't try to stop it because there was nothing left in him that could. He didn't notice the smell at first. Then he did. Smoke. Coming up through the floorboards. Thin at first, then thicker with the chemical sharpness of accelerant underneath it. Something poured deliberately along the base of the walls downstairs. The hitter hadn't come alone in his planning. There was a failsafe. If the job went wrong, the evidence went with the house. Orange light began to pulse at the edges of the attic hatch. Elias looked at it and felt nothing move in him. He looked back down at Havoc. He thought, there is nothing left worth the walk to that window. 6 names with red lines through them. Men he'd served with. Men who'd bought land in Coldwater Creek the same way he had, thinking they were done, thinking they'd found the quiet they'd earned. Clayton had been picking them off one by one, turning their deaths into paperwork, and nobody had looked twice because who looks twice at a dead veteran? They were already invisible, already forgotten. And now Elias was going to burn in an attic with his dog and join them. He closed his eyes. The smoke thickened. Then something moved against his hand. Havoc lifted his head. The effort it cost him was visible in every line of his body, shaking the wound, pulling each millimeter a fight. But he got his head up. His teeth closed on the manila folder, the bloody crumpled thing that had slid against them in the struggle, the folder with 7 names and 6 red lines and all of Clayton's careful, murderous bookkeeping inside it. He held it out toward Elias. Then he turned his head toward the attic window. Not the hatch. The window. His amber eyes came back to Elias's face, and the message in them was not complicated. It was the same message he had been delivering for 9 years, in 3 countries, in every situation where Elias had hesitated at the wrong moment. Move. We're not done. Move. Elias stared at him for 3 full seconds. The fire below found something it liked, and the orange light jumped. He took the folder from Havoc's mouth. He got his arms underneath the dog with the gentleness of a man carrying the last thing he had left in the world. He stood up. The window gave on the second kick. Elias went through it feet first, Havoc pressed against his chest with both arms locked around the dog's midsection. The folder jammed inside his waistband against his spine. The drop was 12 feet onto packed snow, and he took it on his left side to keep Havoc clear of the impact, the landing driving every molecule of air out of his lungs at once. He lay there for 2 seconds, counted them deliberately, then got up. Behind him, the farmhouse windows had turned amber. His grandfather's kitchen, his grandfather's table. The bourbon glass still sitting empty where he'd left it 3 hours ago, when the worst thing in his life was the quiet. He turned his back on it and moved into the tree line. -20 Celsius with the wind. He registered it the way he registered incoming, as a variable to be managed, not a reason to stop. He'd trained in Norway twice with Devgru, spent 17 days in conditions worse than this, learning how cold killed you and how to refuse it. It killed you through your extremities first, then your core. It killed you when you stopped moving. It killed you when you stopped having a reason. He had a reason. He was holding it. Havoc's breathing was still shallow, but it hadn't changed rhythm in the last 10 minutes, which Elias chose to take as information rather than false hope. The dog's eyes were open, tracking the tree canopy above as Elias moved, still present, still watching. "Sit rep," Elias said quietly, talking to him the way he always had in the field. 2 miles to the highway, 40 minutes at this pace. You are going to make it, and so am I. Those are the facts. Havoc's ear rotated toward his voice. "Good," Elias said. "Keep listening." The forest was lodgepole pine, dense enough that the wind dropped to something survivable once he was 30 yards in the snow, shallower under the canopy. He moved along the natural drainage line, low ground, minimizing his silhouette. Old habits from 1,000 night movements in places where being seen was a death sentence. He heard the dogs before he saw the lights. 3 of them bloodhounds by the sound, casting wide their handlers, tracking the perimeter of the burning farmhouse. Clayton's people. 6 or 7 men based on the radio chatter he caught on the wind in fragments. They had the road blocked on both ends. He'd seen the headlights from the window before he jumped. The highway access was cut off, which left the river. The Clearwater Fork ran along the eastern boundary of his property, and in January it ran black and fast between shelves of ice that extended 12 feet from each bank. If he could cross at the shallows north of the Beaver Dam, he'd come up on the far side at the old Hendricks property, empty since the foreclosure, with a dirt road that connected eventually to Route 12. 4 miles instead of 2. Twice the exposure. Havoc losing blood the whole way. He adjusted and moved north. The bloodhounds hit his trail 20 minutes in. He heard the pitch change from casting to driving, the specific urgency that meant they'd locked on, and he stopped trying to be subtle and started trying to be fast. Havoc was heavier than he should have been, the cold making everything stiff, the old knife scar across Elias's ribs from Mosul burning like it had just happened. He pushed through it. He pushed through the PTSD static that kept trying to overlay this forest with other forests, this darkness with other darknesses. Not now. Later. Fall apart later. The river appeared through the trees as a black line between white banks. He found the shallows by memory, tested the ice shelf with one boot, felt it hold, moved across in 8 careful steps, and broke through on the 9th into water that hit his legs like electricity. He didn't make a sound, didn't stop moving. He came up the far bank already going numb from the knee down, the folder still dry against his spine, havoc still breathing against his chest. He pushed into the Hendricks tree line and put 200 yards between himself and the river before he allowed himself to stop behind a deadfall and listen. The bloodhounds had stopped at the river. He could hear the handlers calling them back. The water had broken the scent chain. He exhaled once, long and controlled. Then the tree line behind him opened up and the snow in front of him turned blue-white as a spotlight found him from above, and the rotor wash hit him like a physical wall, and Clayton Briggs stepped out from the shadow of the tree line to his left, with a 12-gauge leveled at his chest. The sheriff's smile was the smile of a man who had done this before and had never once been held accountable for any of it. "End of the road, Thorne." Elias looked at him, looked at the shotgun, looked down at Havoc's face. Then the sky above Clayton came apart with the sound of a second rotor, and the tree trunks lit up green, and at least a dozen targeting lasers settled on Clayton Briggs's chest, simultaneously like a constellation forming out of nothing. Clayton Briggs had not survived 23 years of corrupt law enforcement by being slow to read a room. He read this one in about 4 seconds. The Black Hawk above the tree line. The tactical team deploying from its bay in controlled pairs, weapons up, muzzles tracking. The laser dots multiplying across his chest and throat. His own men, Clayton's hand-picked deputies already dropping their weapons into the snow with the specific haste of men who had made a calculation and chosen survival over loyalty. The shotgun came down. Then the hands came up. 2 agents hit Clayton from behind, simultaneously professional and efficient, and had him face down in the snow with zip restraints on his wrists before he'd finished processing that it was over. He was still trying to talk, still running the same script that had worked for 2 decades. The calm, authoritative voice of a man who controlled the county, the narrative, the outcome. Elias watched his mouth moving and heard nothing above the rotor wash. Boots crunched in the snow toward him. He registered the figure the way he registered everything right now, slowly through a filter of cold and blood loss, and a fatigue so complete it had moved past physical into something structural, like the supports of a building finally giving way. Dark tactical gear, FBI badge on a chain outside the vest, her face shield pushed up. He knew the shape of that face before he saw it clearly. He'd been looking at it in a frame on a shelf he couldn't bring himself to take down for 10 years. "Sarah?" She stopped 3 feet from him. Her eyes went from his face to Havoc, and something moved across hers that she didn't try to hide, the trained federal agent colliding with something older and deeper than any training reached. "Dad." Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone keeping a structure in place through pure force of will. Elias said nothing. He wasn't sure he could. She looked at the folder jammed into his waistband. He pulled it free with one hand, the paper stiff and dark with dried blood at the edges, and held it out to her. She took it, opened it. Her eyes moved down the list of names, and he watched her face and understood by the way the muscle in her jaw worked that she had known some of those names too. "We've been building this case for 14 months, she said. "Mineral survey came back 18 months ago. Rare earth elements, significant concentration, all of it under private land that Clayton needed clear. He went through county records, identified veterans who'd purchased parcels in the relevant zone, and—" She stopped, looked at the red lines through the 6 names. "We had suspicions. We didn't have this." "You have it now," Elias said. She looked up at him. The professional composure had cracks in it now, visible at the edges, the way ice looks just before it gives. "How long have you known I was here?" she asked. "In Montana. How long?" "3 years." "And you didn't—" "You made your position clear, Sarah. In 2014. I respected it." A long silence. The Black Hawk had set down in the clearing beyond the tree line. The tactical team was moving Clayton's deputies into a containment perimeter. Somewhere behind her, a radio crackled with traffic, FBI ops channel, someone running incident command, the machinery of federal law enforcement doing what it did. Sarah looked at his arms, at Havoc. The dog's eyes were open, but barely. His breathing had slowed in the last 10 minutes, and Elias had told himself that was a good sign, less distress, more rest. But he had told himself a lot of things in his life that turned out to be false comfort. Sarah turned her head and called back toward the helicopter. "Vasquez, right now!" The team medic came at a jog, a compact man with a trauma bag who dropped to his knees in the snow next to Elias without a word, and began working with the focused economy of someone who did this for a living. Gloved hands, scissors cutting away the makeshift pressure dressing, penlight, stethoscope. Elias stood very still and let him work and did not look away from Havoc's face. He heard Vasquez's breathing change. The medic worked for 2 full minutes. Chest compressions small and precise. A syringe from the trauma bag. More compressions. He pressed the stethoscope to Havoc's chest and listened for a long time. Then he sat back on his heels. He removed the stethoscope slowly, looked up at Elias with the expression of a man who had delivered this news before and had never found a way to make it land softly. He shook his head. The snow kept falling. Elias's arms, still holding the dog, did not move. Somewhere in the tree line, Clayton Briggs was being walked toward a federal vehicle, and his career and his freedom and everything he had built on the graves of 7 veterans was ending in the dark of a Montana winter night. Elias didn't watch any of it. He looked at Havoc. Elias went down to his knees in the snow, not from weakness, not from the cold, or the blood loss, or the 14 miles his body had put in since midnight. He went down because there was nowhere else to go, no. Next objective, no grid coordinate, no mission parameter left to execute. There was only this. The dog in his arms and the snow under his knees, and the particular silence that falls after everything loud has finished. He pressed his forehead to Havoc's. The fur was cold now, cooler than it should have been. Elias held the contact and breathed slow and even the way Vasquez had taught him nothing, and the Navy had taught him everything, and he let the grief come without fighting it for the first time in longer than he could calculate. Not the PTSD version, the violent ambush that hijacked his nervous system and dropped him into other times and other losses. This was different. This was clean and present and entirely his own. He was here. Havoc was here. That was the whole world for this moment. He felt Sarah's hand come to rest on his shoulder. She didn't speak, didn't try to reframe it or move past it or convert it into something manageable. She just kept her hand there and let the weight of it say what 10 years of silence had made words inadequate to carry. Vasquez stood 12 feet back, giving them room. One of the other agents had turned away. Then Elias felt it, against his forehead. The faintest possible pressure not imagined, not the mind manufacturing what the heart demanded an exhale. Thin as paper, real as anything he had ever confirmed in the field with his own senses. He lifted his head. Havoc's chest rose, fell, rose again. Elias looked at Vasquez and the word came out stripped of everything except the fact itself. He's breathing. Vasquez was already moving. Stethoscope back out, dropping beside them, and this time when he listened, his expression did something different. The professional mask slipping sideways just enough to show what was underneath it, which was disbelief shading rapidly into something that looked almost like awe. "I've got a heartbeat." He said it quietly, like a man reporting something he wasn't fully prepared to defend. "It's weak. It's there." Sarah's hand tightened on Elias's shoulder. The next 4 hours were the controlled chaos of federal medicine and military veterinary emergency care, a combination Elias had never expected to require, and which turned out to exist because enough K-9 units had served in enough bad places that the infrastructure had been built for exactly this. A vet trauma specialist was flown in from Missoula. Havoc went into surgery in a portable field unit that Elias stood outside of for 2 hours and 18 minutes, without sitting down, without eating, without speaking more than operationally necessary to the agents who came to take his statement. He answered their questions. He gave them the folder. He told them everything he knew about Clayton, about the hitter in the attic, about the list and the mineral survey, and the 6 men who had died thinking they were safe. Then he went back to standing outside the surgical unit and waiting. Sarah stood with him for most of it. Somewhere around the 2nd hour she said, "I read your file, the full one, not the VA summary, the actual operational record." He didn't respond. "I didn't understand when I was younger what it meant. The things you did, the places you went." She paused. "I think I was angry because I needed someone to be angry at, and you were the one who kept leaving." "I know," he said. "I'm not angry anymore." "I know that too," he said. "I've been waiting." She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. It was enough. Havoc came through surgery at 6:47 a.m. as the Montana sky went from black to the particular pale gray that precedes real dawn. The vet specialist came out pulling her gloves off and said the bullet had missed everything that mattered by a margin. She declined to put a precise number on because it would sound like she was exaggerating, and that the dog was going to need 6 weeks of restricted movement and a course of antibiotics and absolutely no more getting shot. Elias said that was a reasonable requirement, and he would do his best to comply. 6 months later, the snow was gone from the valley, and the cottonwoods along the Clearwater Fork had come back green, and the farmhouse had been rebuilt on the same foundation, with better windows, and on the porch, on a Thursday morning in June, Elias Thorne stood in sunlight, with his daughter's newborn son in his arms. The baby's name was Marcus. Elias hadn't asked her to do that. She'd done it without telling him until the paperwork was filed. He looked at the name on the birth certificate for a long time without speaking. In the yard, in the shade of the cottonwood by the fence line, Havoc lay stretched in the grass, with his scar catching the light, a clean raised line along his left flank that the vet had closed with 18 stitches. He lifted his head when Elias looked at him. His tail moved once, twice, slow and certain the way he did everything. Elias walked down off the porch toward him. "Still here," he said. Havoc stood up to meet him.